Hello and welcome into the KE Report. Chad and Corey here, getting an update from Luke Tenhave, private activist investor in the resource space, founder of golddiscovery.com, and also Resource 100, a new tool that we'll talk about towards the end of this interview. But first of all, Luke, we ran into you a couple times in Beaver Creek, always rushing from meeting to meeting, like to share insights afterwards and just unpack some of the key takeaways that you got from the conference, any interesting companies that you sat down with, just your main Beaver Creek takeaways just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, happy to be back on the show again. And yeah, thank you for inviting me. In Beaver Creek, we certainly everybody's running around there, and but it's still one of the best conferences I think in this space. And one thing I noticed, I'm not sure if many people thought about it a whole lot, but I found it quite interesting, is that a lot of these, maybe call them old stories, are really tired. People don't talk about them anymore. I remember a time that people really wanted to buy prospect generators because they have several projects. They really do greenfield work, the best odds of being involved in a new discovery. But nobody talks about a Midland or an Almadex or a Mirasol or well, Kinoland maybe a little bit more, and Azimuth. But people talk about the new company of Ivan Bebek. Not sure if I pronounced it right, but Copper-Nickel with their project next to Las Bambas. Of course, you have Power Nickel with their nickel discovery in Quebec, and everybody talks about G2 Goldfields. When will it be taken over? And since nobody talks about it, I realized, well, I think there's a lot of value in those companies still. And I looked at a number of them, and most of them still have a lot of cash in the bank, sometimes 30 or 40% of their market cap. They have, budgets of 10 to 20 million dollars. Like Midland, for example, has 22 million dollar of budget for this year, and they are a 29 million dollar company. So they are spending almost their complete market cap and mostly partner funded, 18 million dollar partner funded. So I was just thinking about, the story is in most cases, of course, most important in this business because if you don't have a story, nobody will buy it, and the process is boring. If you talk about to Rick Rule, for example, he always talks about, the process and giving it time, prospect generators. That's sort of his own phrase, I think, a prospect generator. And I think the companies I just mentioned all have a lot of value and they all do real work. And I think it's just a matter of time before they will make a discovery again. But until then, of course, it's boring. Especially Almadex, they have 20 million in cash and they have a 13 million market cap. So they are really trading at a big discount. And on the surface, nothing looks exciting, but if you start digging a little bit deeper, all these companies are doing, I think, proper work. And that's one thing I noticed in Beaver Creek.
Well, that's such an interesting topic here, Luke Den, because you're right. Look, a lot of these kind of older stories, ones that have been around for a while, they usually offer some sort of safety because they generate actually a little bit of cash flow by some of their operating contracts that they have to run these drill programs. But they do need to make discoveries, and we just keep hearing the lack of new discoveries being made in the sector. How do you discount the fact that, look, these old prospect generators, they're not getting a whole lot of love, but also some of the optionality plays that have been around for a long time that haven't done a whole lot of work recently, they're also not getting a lot of love. So do you like the aggressive drilling of prospect generators that don't hold the whole project, or these companies that hold an asset that just aren't doing much work with it?
Yeah, it's really how much patience you really have. I mean, I could have said the same thing a year ago and probably given bad advice because most of these companies, are down 50% in the stock price just in 1 year. So I think just right now, if you look at the market caps, it's really cheap. And these things are not the first things to move when, the gold equities become popular again. So you could almost still play the more exciting stories, if you will, but keep a really close eye on these prospect generators. Because last week, for example, Azimuth announced a new discovery, and they announced 3% nickel over 8 meters in a channel sample. If this would have been a drill result, it would have been close to one of the best nickel discoveries in the last 20 years, because some of those high-grade smaller projects really went up 10x just after one of these holes, like Serious Resources, for example, in Australia. So I found it amazing, and I bought a lot of Azimuth last week because there's a new discovery. They still have Elmer, which is their 100% gold project, which I think, if you would spin it out, is worth more than the current market cap. And they have $10 million in cash. So But what does it take to make a company exciting again? Well, it's either, I think, a discovery, some new event, or a new team member or new investor. People look at these things as well. When a big name comes in, then suddenly everything changes. So yeah, to make it change, I think you would need either a very good gold market or a discovery or a new person to get involved. But at these valuations, I think the downside is also important to keep in mind. And in my opinion, these companies are pretty safe in terms of how safe things can get in this sector.
Luke, I know you normally focus on the earlier stage companies doing exploration work that can really move the needle, or like you're saying, a new catalyst, a new investor coming in, something happening new on the project. But with all the compression and valuation in the sector, there's actually a lot of companies that were the market darlings in the 2016, 2017, 2018 time period, doing the drill plays, finding the new discoveries, delineating resources, and now they're considered the boring developers. And they've been compressed down so much in market cap that a lot of these companies that have delineated 1 million, 2 million ounces of gold or more are trading at market caps pretty close to the drill plays that haven't even defined resources yet. So do you look at that side of things, talking about old stories becoming new again? Are there any old stories in the development space that have your attention?
Yeah, well, I think we discussed this a little bit last time, but I bought Montage in March when the Lundins really did a big new financing in it. And the announcement was such that this became really like a Lundin family company. And in this market still, you can buy these things. You can still wait and wait for a certain event to happen. And it's almost, if the market is not really like 2016 or 2020, you need sort of a big name to support you to get, a good share price performance going. You don't see many companies going up 3-4x without having a Lassonde involved or a Ross Beatty involved or a Lundin family involved. Almost always there's some person like that, or there is a really new event, a new discovery or something. So I think for now, I mean, if you want to position yourself, for sure, it's an opportunity, I guess. But I've been waiting for a couple of these development stories. For example, Cartier in Quebec, amazing land package, close to all the miners. I think they have about 2 or 2.5 million ounces. They have a PEA with a $300 or $400 million NPV, and they were trading at, I think, $20 million. Really, the sort of the cheapest ounces in the best belt in Quebec, where you have like 8 mines or something. So sometimes you have to wait a long time for these things to finally get moving again. And in Cartier's case, you see it now that it starts moving a little bit, but it's so hard, especially in a market that's, we are still in, that nobody is still chasing it. If we get another 2020 or 2016, or maybe a slower version of that, then these things will all re-rate again. But I think the ones that will really do well is where there's a new event. So either a discovery or some bigger name that gives confidence to the market that this project will really be developed, and it's not just, a 5 or 6 year development process without any exciting news. So in Fireweed's case, which is zinc, you see that they also want to emphasize that they're going to do a lot of exploration on the gold side. And in the meantime, maybe they will go into a little bit of a more boring phase for the zinc side. But with the name like Lundin involved, suddenly people are excited again, and the stock is just moving slowly from $1 to $1.30 right now, and could be the future NGX with spin outs. And so I think big names is still a theme. No big name, no poster child. In this market, it's still difficult. So positioning in other things only if you really believe in the project, I think.
Yeah, you're so right that you need a big name to back financings to continue to fund exploration, because the market is not there for these retail financings to raise 5, 10, $20 million. You need that large holder. So how do you analyze when you have a large backer, say like an Eric Sprott or something that's more on the investment side of things, versus a company having a major miner that, let's say, holds 9.9% of the company that will continue to fund it moving forward? But fact of the matter is, some of these major miners, they move slower than what the strategic investor would want companies to do. Do you provide any sort of a discount or any different analysis when it comes to the different type of strategic backer a company has?
Yeah, as long as the company is below 10%, that's a good thing, because it gives flexibility to the junior to get other investors involved, of course, depending on the deal they made with the major. I think last week or the week before, Sanu Gold got Anglo involved, and I looked at it and looked at the land package, and it completely made sense. I mean, the land package is bordering Anglo's properties, and I felt, well, this is a good sign for Sanu Gold for sure. But it also makes complete sense for Anglo because they have surrounding properties, and Sanu is really exploring. So is it really, a sign that this stock will now suddenly start doing well? I think it's still depending in that case on results, and not just because this big company is coming in, suddenly everybody wants to own it. I think for the big company, it's just a way of securing their interest with the next door property, and they had some good results so far. In other cases, like G2 Goldfields, you have Anglo as well, Anglo Ashanti that is, and there you really have a lot of tension. Like you have G Mining, and Lundin was perhaps involved in that takeover process that G Mining won. Reunion is now gone. G2 is still left. And with Anglo buying, I think even in the market, then suddenly you feel like there's a level of urgency by different parties to get involved in that story. So it depends on, if you can analyze the reason of the strategic investor, the major gold miner, for example. Sometimes it could be a signal to get involved, and in other cases, it's just a good sign, but not necessarily a buying sign, in my opinion. And when people like the Lundins or Pierre Lassonde or Eric Sprott to a lesser extent, because he spreads his bets a little bit more. I mean, he's now investing in many silver deals, and I think that's for him more of a, a sort of a silver leverage investment rather than stock picking. And I think the other guys like Lundin and Lasson, they are really sort of stock pickers, or they have stock pickers in house to, take 5 or 6 positions and try to make them work like crazy. I judge that a little bit different. I think I would rather be invested alongside Lundins or Lasson than just Eric Sprott. On the other hand, if I own a company and Eric comes in instead of 40 retail owners, I'm also happy. So because he's a loyal shareholder in most cases. So it's not a bad thing. It's just not something I would follow him into just because he gets into it.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the same thing even with the strategics. There's different kind of strategic investments where even the majors, sometimes they're just slow walking a project for a decade, and other times they're actually imminently expecting some big update in the next year or so. So same thing with the strategic investors that are individuals versus the companies. But there's another form of investment that some companies are making into projects, and that's through royalty and streaming. And you brought up a great point off mic that some of the best development projects over the last couple of years have spun out their own royalties. People will think back to Great Bear, or I know Vizsla has done it, but there's a couple more you mentioned where they're attracting the interest of larger companies and larger investors. I'd love to get your thoughts on this trend we're seeing of when you have a quality project, spinning out a royalty in advance just to get in front of the eventual development scenario.
Yeah, and it's not always a spin out necessarily. The one today, for example, is Cisco Royalties. They are buying a royalty on a Delgaranga project owned by Spartan on the ASX. And they were drilling a sort of an old project but made new discoveries, really high grade, with drill holes like 27 meters of 40 grams gold. And they are trading at $1.5 billion right now. And somebody else owned a royalty that Osisko is now buying for 50 million US. And it's just a development project, but it's near the old mine. And I was thinking, well, $50 million for royalty. I owned a company called Minco, which in turn owned the royalty on Del Radiant, which was sold for 25 million, maybe 6, 7 years ago. So the valuations on royalties are going up. Great Bear 200 million. Well, Vizsla is now trading at 65 million. Origin is trading at 300 million. Abitibi Royalties 250 million for the extension of Malartic. So you see that the royalties are really trading well. And Kenorland, of course, owns a 4% royalty on Frotet, which is not really priced in yet, I think, in their market cap. I think it shows that the best companies, those royalties are worth a lot. And I think they may even be more interesting than the equity, because owning a royalty on Vizsla will not give you a lot of dilution. Maybe the company would give you more dilution. So I think it's a nice signal. When Osisko invested in Arizona mining in 2015, it was 1 or 2 years before the takeout, and I think the company went 10x. Osisko has good due diligence, and I think it's a signal that Spartan Resources is probably a good company, but that company already went up 2 or 3x. So I'm not sure about the upside, but I just think it's a very interesting signal to see all these companies now really paying up for gold royalties.
Luke 10, do you think any of these royalty spinouts or royalties that are created by companies that are moving assets forward, or any of these other smaller royalty companies that have more or less that one key strategic royalty, do you see any of them having the potential to build a long life, large royalty company? Or do you simply just see these key royalties being picked off by the couple major royalty companies?
Yeah, I think it's the same for the junior miners. Unfortunately, there are not many companies anymore that really built an empire themselves. I think the Origin royalty on silicon, I mean, it sounds a little bit, in my opinion, like the early days of Franco-Nevada, where you buy a royalty in the beginning, it's worth nothing. I think it's 2015, nobody cared about this project. And now that it's the best discovery, I think the best gold discovery of the last years, some people even think it's more than 20 or 30 million ounces, over the longer run, then a 1 or 2% royalty could be very, very valuable. And I think Franco-Nevada was, built on one royalty. That royalty gave them a market cap to go out. Of course, they were first movers in the royalty model, but I doubt that Origin will keep their royalty. That will probably be sold at some point. And Altius owns the other part of that royalty and is also in demand right now. The stock is doing so well. I think mostly because of the gold royalty, but they have amazing other royalties as well. So will companies still be built based on amazing assets, that being a royalty or maybe just a project and building it? You see it a little bit more in Australia, where, for example, Adriatic Metals, they made a discovery and they built the project themselves. But I cannot think of many Canadian small companies, making a discovery and building it themselves. In most cases, the best projects and the best royalties are taken over 2 or 3 years after they are recognized.
Well, Luke, it's always fascinating to get the way you're looking at different companies, how things are being valued, which sectors within or subsectors within the resource stocks are getting a bid or maybe presenting an unseen opportunity. And to that point, you have just recently updated a site, Resource 100, where you're going to be giving investors more of a snapshot and tool of some of the biggest movers in the space in different sectors and in different areas of news. So maybe take a minute or two and unpack this new tool that you're developing for investors as a resource for investing in the resource sector.
Yeah, I was always fascinated by, one of the reasons I came into this sector is because you want to make, 10 baggers, 5 baggers. You want to make big returns. Why otherwise take all the risk? And of course, everybody knows a couple of names like Great Bear and Philo, things that went up 10, 20, 30x. But I found it fascinating, like how, where does it really start? Of course, in those cases with a discovery hole, but you have many other examples, even from producers like Capstone that go up 10x on really good work. And even though you have websites where you can see the movers of the day, I felt like I want to track performance not just on the day, but also on the week and on the month and on the year to see which companies really perform best. And not just the Canadian companies, but the Australian ones, the UK ones, the US ones, and resource focused. So mining and energy. And if you look at that list, Resource 100 is a little bit of a name like Fortune 100 or Fortune 500, where you show not the biggest companies necessarily, but the best performing companies. And this year, even in a year that's not so amazing yet, you see companies that went up 11x and 10x, 9x, 8x. So I really like, showing those movers, but also showing the news behind it. So we couple the news releases that are responsible for these moves in the same overview so that you can very quickly find out, hey, this company went 10x, why? This company went 3x, why? And you can filter on volume if you want. You can filter on country if you just prefer to invest in North America. And by looking at these things, it also helps in identifying the next 5 or 10 bagger. Because if you find out why these companies go up 5x, 10x, discovery, of course. But there's other reasons why these juniors at some point start moving, maybe in front of a construction decision or in front of the construction itself. There may be other reasons. And by looking at the winners, you can learn from how to find the future winners. And that's why I decided to make the Resource 100 the best performing companies in our resource space.
What other information are you going to include in some of this when it comes to some of the people involved in companies or even correlating management team members? I know there's a lot of information you're trying to include in this website.
Well, initially, I just wanted to show the companies the best performers because I wanted to have one subject, that's it. But while working on it, I realized, hey, this is pretty cool. We are going to share all this in nice visuals on social media automatically. And why not also focus on the best? Well, the best is, of course, a nice word to use, but the best insiders or the biggest insiders. So we have an insider overview that's not focused on the companies necessarily, but on the people, because investors think that insiders and people are most important in most cases. And then you see, for example, this week that Eric Sprott, he invested 6 million in Aftermath Silver. He invested 3 million in Cerro de Pasco. And you see a list of insiders. You can see what is the biggest buyer of the week, the biggest buyer of the month. Very quickly you can filter. But every day we will also release an image of the biggest investors in the space. So we will show the company as well, but it's oriented around the people so that you can really follow the Eric Sprotts of this world, the Pierres of this world, the names that everybody knows and is fascinated by. Also in a big list from 1 to 200 or whatever number of big investors we have in this space.
Well, and just one more thing that you're doing I think is very interesting is in addition to not just showing the biggest movers, but tying their news releases to it because you're able to click on how many news releases that company's put out and maybe what's behind the move. And in addition to the insiders, you're also tracking the best drill results. I have a feeling this is going to be a very popular feature of the site. So maybe just speak to you're looking at all commodities, but you're looking at which drill results are really moving the markets.
Yeah, so this is a tool that we developed already some time ago for gold discovery, and we incorporated in this site as well because I think it's part of the best performing companies often start with a good drill hole, and that's why we also track drill holes, and we'll also release the top 10 drill results in nice overviews as we have the data already, and we have a couple of new initiatives as well. So everything that really moves this market, that gets investors into a story, those type of things we want to follow, and those type of things we will get into the Resource 100. And ideally, we have a top 100 list for every topic that really is interesting to investors and really moves stocks.
All right. Well, it was great having you back on the show. And again, if people listening in want to follow the Resource 100, we will put a link to it down below so you can follow along with Luke 10 Halves' work. And always great getting you on the show just to get your thoughts as an activist investor in the space. What has your thoughts leaving Beaver Creek? Which companies are moving? Which companies have news that's compelling? And I thought the discussion on the royalties and how they're valued and getting increasing value was an interesting component. So always appreciate having you on the KE report and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks a lot. See you next time.